Slay, because I'm gonna put this on YouTube for people who can't make it today to be able to watch later. And I'll keep the chat open if you guys think of any questions to ask Bethany or me in the meantime, both of us. It's very exciting. Then I'm gonna ask Bethany a mix of questions about like the book and like her writing process, and then we'll talk we can also talk spoilers because like I'm assuming everyone who's here has finished the book, which is really cool. Loved it, by the way. Oh shoot, not the fireworks. I guess that works.
It's appropriate though.
Perfect timing.
I always forget that there's like hand gestures you can make on a MacBook.
Really? I didn't know
Yeah.
that. I don't think it works for me.
It's like a thing. I know it's like a thing you can turn off and on. I just never turned it off.
I like those things in Naruto. You make the right hand signs and just magic happens.
I know there's this one too. I love showing people this. I think is it 1 or 2 rock on? There we go. Laser light show.
Nice. I love it.
Okay, I know I already asked you this when we hopped on about 10 minutes ago, but for everyone here, how are you today?
I'm good. Yeah, I've already had a really full day. As I was saying, I'm writing the third book in the trilogy right now, and I'm on a very strict deadline. So I'm just working furiously, and I'm about halfway through the third one right now. So
oh my gosh.
I'm good.
Well, based on how These Burning Stars ended, I'm sure like everyone here were like, we can't wait to read book 2, which you said comes out in October, right?
Yes, it does. Yeah, it comes out in October. It's so funny when you write a trilogy, and particularly, I wrote the first book to be a standalone novel with the understanding that it could be a trilogy. And so whenever you write a sequel, you have to contend with the fact that like it can't be the same thing as the first book. It'll inevitably have different qualities, different kinds of mysteries and character development. And what I love about book 2 is that it really expands on the characters and expands on the world. And I hope you guys will like it. I ended up really liking it. I hated it while I was writing it, and then I, finished writing it and revised it. And a couple of friends who I really value read it, and they came back and said that it was amazing. And so I was kind of like, oh, maybe it's not terrible. So I hope I ended up thinking it was great, and I hope that my readers will like it too.
I'm not a writer, but I've heard from several writers and authors that like writing a sequel is like one of the hardest things to do.
It's the hardest thing I've ever done. And I have a PhD. So like, I've gotten a PhD, and this is still the hardest thing I've ever done.
Can I ask what the PhD is in?
And
if that influenced it?
It's in American literature, actually. I was a college professor for 10 years, and I taught science fiction and 21st century American literature. So that was my PhD. And then I wrote this book. The thing about a sequel that is so hard is that for most writers, when they first write a sequel, they've never had to write on deadline before. So they've just written when they could and haven't had the pressure of, the publishing. And then on top of that, the second thing that's so stressful is that you're usually writing the sequel while your first book is being polished and then published. So you have all of the anxiety of the first book coming out and not knowing if it'll be well received. And then on top of that, particularly if it is well received, then you have the terror of like, was I a one and done? Like, can I actually do this again? I mean, I've written over 20 novels in my life, but there was still this feeling of like, if people really liked the first one, then the second one has to meet their expectations. Like, I don't want to disappoint my readers. And inevitably, there will be readers who are disappointed, and then there will be readers who love it. You just can't live on the hope that everyone will love your book. But the pressure of that is really intense. And it's been interesting to me as I've been writing the third one, how much less emotional trauma I'm incurring than I did when it's still incredibly hard and stressful, but I'm not nearly as like emotionally worked up by the process as I was for the sequel. It's just the hardest thing I've ever done. I even
Well,
say
you
that
did
in my
it.
acknowledgments. Like, this is the hardest thing I've ever done. So,
And you're like, like you said, you did your whole PhD. You've been
yeah.
a teacher. Like, and teaching is a hard freaking job,
Oh my God. Yeah. Teaching is
especially
hard.
in college.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting, I've had an interesting trajectory in my career. So, yeah.
Well, we're talking a little bit about the writing process. So, like, you just talked about your drafting, like writing the sequel. Now you're drafting the third book. Like, can you tell us a little bit about the journey that was just writing These Burning Stars? Like, where
Yeah.
did the idea come from? Like, what was that process like?
So I always think that this story is so funny because I have always been a writer who like very intricately plots out my stories. Like I spend weeks developing world building, creating an outline, creating character charts before I start writing. And I had been working on another project that was not going well. And I sort of was just like, I'm just going to sit down and like free write and just see what happens, just to kind of rediscover like the fun of writing. And so I did. I sat down and just free wrote this. So the scene you guys may remember from the beginning of the book where June meets the pirates and when she first gets the memory coin. I wrote that scene or a very early version of that scene. And I liked it. And so I just kept going. And eventually I did all of the world building and the plot outlining and the character development and um like ended up spending about 2 years drafting and rewriting and revising it before I entered it into this mentorship competition called Pitch Wars, where basically you work with a mentor to polish your novel, and then you get an invitation to this literary agent showcase where you get to put your pitch in front of literary agents and hopefully get an agent. And so in 2021, I had that agent showcase after having worked to polish the novel, and I got like 5 offers of representation from different agents. So it was like really encouraging. Um, and then I signed with my agent and then sold my book like 4 months later, like 4 or 5 months later. Um, and so that's how I got there. So it was probably a process of between when I started writing and when the book was published, it's almost 5 years. So
So sorry.
that's okay.
Pay? No. They're like, you're not paying. Friends, I'm like dog sitting 3 dogs right now. And so they are all doing their own thing.
That's okay. I've been there.
No, that's incredible. Yeah, an author that I'm working with right now, her name's Sewell on like our bindery program. She also submitted her novel to Pitch Wars.
Oh
And that's
yeah.
how she found her agent,
That's so
which is
cool.
really,
Yeah.
really cool.
It was a unfortunately it's defunct now, but it was an amazing program for so many people. Really was the first time I had ever engaged with an author community. And so like made friends in that program that have stuck with me and become my good friends. And so I was really grateful to it for what happened. So
I love that. So, you mentioned that you worked in higher education for 10 years as a professor and teaching American literature and sci-fi. When it comes to like writing and reading, like who are your most influential authors?
oh my God. Yeah. I mean, so there's a couple of ways to think about it. There's the the kid me,
Mhm.
like this is when I started writing, is when I was like 8 years old. And then there's like right now, who do I read that drives me and makes me want to keep writing and inspires the work that I do. I mean, as a kid, it was all Brian Jakes, C.S. Lewis, Madeline L'Engle. As a teenager, I was really into like TV series like The X-Files and Star Trek and Xena Warrior Princess, and like those things really drove me. And then when I got my PhD, and then I really was focusing on a lot of genre writing like fantasy and sci-fi and things like that. The authors that started particularly really inspiring me were Octavia Butler, N.K. Jemisin, Nnedi Okorafor in recent years, Yoon-Ha
Queens.
Lee. Yoon-Ha Lee, oh my God, just amazing. Rivers Solomon, Anne Leckie, and then much more recently, I read Arkady Martine's A Memory Called Empire and was like, oh my God, that's so
I
good.
haven't read that yet.
You haven't read, oh my God, it's
No.
so good. It's so good. It's a duology. The sequel is like maybe even better than the first one. Um, just so great. And then I read very widely. I just read, I'm telling everybody about it because everyone needs to read it. This historical horror novel called Grey Dog by Elliot Gish. Um, and that I found that was I know that a book is good when it makes me want to write. I'll like
Mm.
experience this really visceral desire to write when I'm reading a really good book. And so Elliot Gish did that to me.
I love
So yeah,
that.
just so many.
Were you always drawn to sci-fi over fantasy? I know they're kind of like under like the umbrella of like speculative fiction. Um, like I would say for myself personally, like I've always been drawn towards like the more fantasy route, but like when you find a good space opera, like it just like
Yeah.
it just hits.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Um,
I mean, I would say that I have read equally as much in
okay.
fantasy and sci-fi. Um, they, the thing about sci-fi that appeals to me um, is this opportunity to imagine a future where in some way we survive
Mhm.
and create something completely new. Um, I All of my sci-fi though has elements in it that draw from fantasy. So,
Mhm.
for example, in These Burning Stars, there's a very strong religious system that really influences the book. There's this consortium of powerful families. There's like this religious head, which is the clerisy, that really influences everything that happens. And even Jun, her casting, her sort of hacker work, the way I wrote it was intended to not resemble anything that we would think of as hacking, but to almost be more like wizardry than
Yeah.
than hacking. And I think that was very much influenced by fantasy, and the future projects that I've been working on and am intending to work on are also strongly influenced by fantasy elements.
So that kind of brings me to like a question. What when you're was maybe it's like a two-pronged question. Like when you were writing these Burning Stars, was it always like a space opera to start with, or did it like start as something else and then like it turned into like a space opera and then kind of when you're writing a space opera or science fiction, what kind of like research goes into that? Because obviously there's a lot of like technology and like
Yeah.
innovation surrounding um the world of your book and how your characters interact with like the society in that way. I just like how because it's different from fantasy in a lot of ways because like there's like technology and innovation in their own ways too. But a lot of times I think a lot of people think of like medieval like Western fantasy
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
there's like lack of technology.
Right. So much in terms of the research that went into the book, it was hugely inspired by a lot of uh, critical work that I read as a PhD. So, work by feminists, work by sociologists, work by public people in public service. I'll give you an example. I've spoken about this before. The gender system in These Burning Stars was very much influenced by this book by a scholar named Marilyn Fry. And one of the big things that she put forward is that the first thing we do when we look at a person is we try to identify their gender. Like, it's just this ingrained impulse in us, which is part of why people get so hysterical when they can't automatically identify someone's gender, or when somebody's gender defies their expectations, their gender performance defies their expectations. And so I came up with the idea of the gender mark, which is intentionally vague. I don't actually tell you what it is or where it is, as a way to think about that marking of gender as existing somewhere other than our haircuts, the clothes we wear, that it would actually, but that it would still be something that that's the first thing they look for in a person. The first thing they notice is their gender mark. So like scholarship like that really influenced it. And to sort of get at the question of like, why did I know it was going to be a space opera? From the first scene, the character is interacting with space pirates. So it kind of like immediately set this like, okay, well, this is an interaction of people in space. And interestingly, I had never written a space opera before. I'd written lots of science fiction and lots of fantasy, but I'd never written a space opera before. And I had this scenario where these clerics are chasing this hacker who has this, important secret, and it just seemed like this perfect opportunity to create multiple cultures and multiple planets and think about the movement between worlds and the difference between what station life would be like versus, the lap of luxury on a lush green world. And so I wouldn't say that I spent, hours and hours on research. I'm a big in the moment researcher. So I'll be writing and I'll realize I have no idea how turbines work. Let's look up how turbines work. And then it was also just hugely influenced by years of scholarship and study that I had already done.
Oh, then I have a fun question to follow up on this. So during your writing researching process, what's the craziest thing you've Googled?
I've Googled a lot of things that would get the FBI on my tail if I wasn't careful. I've done a lot of Googling into weaponry, a lot of um uh martial arts, how plastic explosives work, what kinds of different guns are and what the kickback on that gun would be. So I've done a lot of research into weapons and fighting and war stuff, which I'm still always doing. But I've also done a lot of research into geology and so for example, I did this one search of what's the density of different rocks because I was trying to think about the material that Jevite is made out of and what would be the density, what would that feel like, what would and so just super random stuff like that.
And then probably when you're attaching that knowledge to your writing, was your developmental editor were you just trust me on this? I Googled it, or they're I'm not sure this is what would happen when an arm's blown off.
Yeah. So luckily for me and my editor, These Burning Stars isn't hard sci-fi. So
Okay.
it's not highly technical in the sense where there's a lot of it that needs to be fact checked. But
Okay.
there have definitely been moments, although I can't give you a specific example before, where my developmental editor, or often my copy editor, because copy editors are a gift from the gods, has said, hey, you wrote this, but I don't think that actually makes sense. What if you did this way. And I'd be like, oh my gosh, you're absolutely right. Um, that raises interesting questions for, people who do write hard sci-fi, where, you really do need to understand the space-time continuum, or how these different things works. I wonder who their fact checkers are.
Yeah.
Nothing I wrote needed a fact checker, essentially.
Thinking about like Andy Weir right now.
Yes, absolutely. So Andy Weir, who does he have scientist friends who he sends his work to? Is his, editor someone who's known for hard sci-fi? So, I will give you an example for the third book without giving anything away. There's a reason why for this particular element, genetics is important. And I don't know much about genetics beyond, you get 50% from this side and 50% from this side. And so I actually, a friend of mine got me in touch with a geneticist.
Oh,
And we're
wow.
now working. He emailed me and gave me some ideas, and I'm thinking through that. And then we're going to talk back and forth about whether what I'm actually doing makes any kind of sense.
Yeah.
So in that case, I would be relying on the expertise of this, actual geneticist. And if my editor came back and was like, "Are you sure?" I'd be like, "Hey, Dan, are you sure?" And that would be the extent of fact checking.
I love that. Okay.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about your characters now because
Okay.
oh my gosh. And guys, if you, in the comments, if you have any questions to fill in the gaps about like our girls, our main characters, please feel free. Because I've just got a few written down because I was like writing them haphazardly. Okay.
Thank
I
you,
get the
Kai.
sense that you love morally gray characters. Because when I was like reading like Essex chapters, I was like, Essex is a menace first and a woman second. That's
Yeah,
like that's what was going through my brain when I was reading her chapters.
yeah.
And so what was it like writing Essex? Like how do you develop a morally great character beyond them being like, oh, they're just not a good person. But you also know that like I know my audience and my readers are going to love her. And they're gonna
Yeah,
love Six too, because they
yeah.
have this bond that they just can't
Mhm.
deny.
Yeah, yeah. So Essex was so much fun to write. Like to this day, she's one of the most fun things I've ever done as a writer. And so part of what drove her was the desire to just have fun, to just create someone who is like appalling, but also hilarious, who 1 second you're like, oh my God, I love Essex so much. And then the next second it's like, oh my God, she's threatening to murder children. Like this person is horrible. And so, in developing Essex, what was important was that you need to understand why she engenders such loyalty and, even though conflicted, such love. So like
Mhm.
Chono, for example, who's sort of the moral center of the book, even though she herself is morally gray. She loves Essex and she's very devoted to Essex.
Mhm.
There has to be something seductive and charismatic about Essex that would make someone love and want to be, in her orbit. There has to be something about her that would make Six go to such lengths to want to impress her. And if you just have like a purely, like, I don't know if you guys have watched Game of Thrones, like Ramsay Bolton kind of character who
Mhm.
is compelling, but like nobody loves Ramsay Bolton. Ramsay Bolton is just purely horrific.
No.
Um, then there have to be things about Essex that could make you understand why people are attached to her. And so in writing her, I wanted her to be funny. I wanted her to be badass. I wanted her to make you root for her, and then feel guilty for that. So it was very much about creating this reader experience, um, where I was trying to get readers to think about like, what is it that draws us to these deeply charismatic, horrible human beings? Like, what is it that feeds in us? Um, so yeah, it was it
Yeah, and
was
it's just like Essek, she just kind of like she like relishes in the drama and the messiness.
oh yeah.
And
Yeah, she's just out, when you say she's a menace first and a woman, like Essek isn't a feminist, Essek isn't about girl power. Essek is entirely self-interested. And everything for her is a game to see how she can get what she wants, and fuck with people along the
yeah,
way. And that is what Six becomes too. Six isn't as malevolent as Essek by any means, but so much of what Six is doing in their entire mission, and it even says this at the end of the book, is they're trying to fuck with Essek. Like that's
yeah,
the game for them. And so it was really fun to imagine their interactions and to create a character that is just vile but so fun to read.
yeah. Because
Yeah.
Essek and Six's dynamic, I don't know if you've read Vicious by V.E. Schwab.
Not yet. I've heard
Okay.
great thing. Did it remind you of something in there?
So it's also like a cat and mouse type of deal between these two villains, essentially, Victor Vale and Eli Ever. I won't spoil it for you, but like they do very similar things, terrible things to others and each other to try to like best each other to show like who's the most villainous or like I
Yeah.
gotcha, like yes, I will kill your family in front of you. And
Yeah.
I'll dance on your grave.
Yeah. That's very Six and Essek. Yeah, they've definitely got that vibe for sure. I just
Uh,
saw a question in the comments I want to
oh
read.
yeah, I was
You
gonna
said
read that next.
You said the book start as a free write, and the twist towards the end with Essek and Six was so good. Did that twist also come from free writing, with a plot twist that reframes the entire novel before it? How much did you have to change and edit for all to line up?
That's a good question.
It's a really good question. So I didn't come up with the twist until I was probably. Um, has everybody here read it? Like, just raise your hand if you've read it.
I'm pretty sure we all have.
Okay. All right.
Oh,
Great.
cool, guys. That
I don't want to
was
give
awesome.
in. I don't want to give anything away. So I knew in creating Six that Six had to be somebody. Like as you're reading it, like some characters have said, when I started reading it, I assumed that Jun was actually Six. And then it was like, oh, well, maybe is it possible that Lise is actually Six? Who is Six actually going to be? Are we ever going to meet them? And then as I was writing it and sort of wrestling with that question, and thinking about like what is the best possible revenge that Six could make on a person who is so obsessed with her own life and her own will. And I realized the best possible revenge would to be literally to steal her life and take her life. And so I just kind of had this light bulb moment of like, oh my God, Six is Essek. Six is this Essek that we're meeting in the contemporary chapters that we spend the whole book thinking is actually Essek, but Essek is dead the whole time. And
You got me
so
so good. My
I'm
jaw was
so
on the
glad.
floor.
Yeah. I think it works really well. I've had a couple of readers who've like messaged me and been like, I don't like that. Like I feel very conflicted about that. And often it's people who are like, I wanted Essek to live. And the only
She
comfort,
does.
yeah, the only comfort that I can give them is that like in a way she does. And you will definitely feel her presence. She's definitely in the later books, I would say. So you don't lose Essek, despite how it ends.
That was actually like one of my questions I kind of like wrote down. It was like very similar to what Jay asked. And I was like, how the heck do people come up with plot twists? Like actually good plot twists. Like I'm like, how does it work? My brain just doesn't work like that.
I mean, like I said, I've been writing since I was like 7 or 8 years old, and I've been reading voraciously since I was younger than that. And when you essentially like, writing isn't an ingrained, like being a good writer, a good storyteller, it's not something that you're just born with. It's a craft. Like it's a
Right.
skill that you build through study and practice. And so I can't speak to how other writers come up with their twists. But
Mhm.
for me, it's very much, and not everything I'm trying to write has a twist in it.
Mhm.
Most of the work I've done doesn't have some big twist. But this was an example where circumstances just came together and I was like, oh my God, Essek has to
Ding,
be
ding,
sick.
ding, ding,
It
ding.
just, yeah, it just has to, that's the perfect. And I didn't tell anyone. Nobody knew that twist because I wanted to see when people started reading it
Mhm.
whether the twist hit.
Yeah.
And then I started to get, the friends who I'd given to, I started to get like hysterical text messages of like, wait a second. Oh my God, is this true? And it was very satisfying to find out that it worked.
Well, I love that part because it also kind of goes back to part of the first chapter of the book when real Essek was telling the novitiates six, yeah, I think when they were kids, and it was
Yeah,
like if you want to be like a novitiate of mine, you have to do something that impresses me.
yeah.
And six, throughout the rest of time, did so many things to impress Essek all the way down to all the little like the gifts they would send
Uh-huh.
and killing Elysiana, but
hmm
and then Essek finding out and then essentially giving Essek everything she ever wanted was being
Yeah,
heir to the Nightfoots.
yeah.
And then the real kicker was like, bitch, I am you.
Yeah, it's like I give you everything you want and then take it back is essentially what. And I mean, the book is a revenge fantasy.
Right.
Um, you know, book two actually spends a lot of time thinking about the limits of revenge, um, and the problems of revenge. But Six's whole game is they want the best possible revenge on Essek. And they ultimately, not all of their plans go to plan,
Right.
but they do get that revenge on Essek in the end.
So we're oh, that was the question. There we go. Okay. So then going still continuing with like our characters, obviously like the book tackles themes of like atrocities, genocide, like who's to blame, justice, guilt, like colonialism. Like how did those themes like play a role in like shaping your characters?
Yeah. I mean, so as a my work as a PhD was very much focused on race.
Mhm.
And you can't study race without studying colonialism and the uh, slave labor and things like that. And so when I was writing the book, I was thinking very much about indentured and essentially enslaved labor forces, including African Americans, including farm workers, including Asian or Chinese railroad workers and things like that. And I was also thinking a lot about contemporary ways that resource wars hurt actual people. So, for example, like cobalt, which is an essential material in our cell phones. Cobalt mines are one of the most dangerous places to work. And it's impoverished people of color who are working the cobalt mines. And we're having these results of terrible pollution. And basically, the least protected people, both in our country and in our world, end up taking the weight of the risks to keep our society going. And I just see the impacts of that everywhere I look.
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of like it was impossible for it not to be in the book. Like it's really difficult for me to think of any story that isn't also thinking about economics and capitalism and resource wars. Um, and so, I I had the idea that there would be this, essential energy trade. And from that, it just became kind of natural to explore the societal circumstances around the energy trade. And based
Mm-hmm.
on my own knowledge of how things work in our world, I couldn't help but turn that into a sort of meditation on the problems of energy trade and resource wars.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Because I do feel like science fiction and fantasy, like it often is like a to start a conversation or continue the conversation of like the happenings in like our world.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's been its history, um,
Right.
almost since inception. And sometimes it does that in a detrimental way where it like perpetuates, um, myths of, rugged individualism and, racial anxieties and things like that. And then sometimes you'll get a text like Starship Troopers, which is absolutely a parody of military culture. And then you'll get a lot of the work that's been published by queer writers and people of color in the past, 2 to 3 decades, which is all really using genre fiction as a way to explore the dehumanization and oppression of people groups in our own world.
That awesome. Like I'm starting to realize I didn't write down enough questions, but
It's
you've been
okay.
answering them great. If you guys have any questions in the comments, please drop them. I'm like trying to think. Um, so I remember you saying like before everyone started coming in, you were saying so like book two are some are fractured worlds, vicious worlds, on vicious worlds?
On Vicious Worlds, yeah.
Yes, that's it.
On
I was
Vicious
looking on
Worlds,
Goodreads earlier. Okay.
yeah.
You said okay, so book two, it's a completely different story from book one, obviously. It's not so much cat and mouse anymore, but we're expanding the world and we're going back to the trouble. What
Yes. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
so like what are you most excited for people to read for like about on Vicious Worlds? Like what are we going to expect? What's are June and Lise okay? I'm going in different directions now because they also have a relationship going on. They said the L word near the end when Lise almost died.
Yeah, I mean,
They're
Lisa
in
and June
love.
are ride or die in love for each other. So,
I love
yes, exactly. They are definitely, there is no question of their devotion to each other. So, the sequel, one of the spoilers that I'll give is the sequel is divided between stuff that's happening in the Treble and
Mhm.
then stuff that's happening on the new Givenny colony.
Okay.
And the intersection of these two storylines and how they're reliant on each other. And one of the things that happens in the second book that I think is really interesting is so much of the Givenny choice to leave the Trouble and form this moon colony. It's a kind of utopic vision. It's like we're going to get away from the Trouble. We're going to have our own society again with our own government and our own ways of being. And we're basically going to escape the oppression that we've experienced in the Trouble. However, they, in going to Capamame, they bring a lot of the problems of the Trouble with them. And so it ends up, I will be interested to see how people feel because in some ways there's a kind of murder mystery plot line
Okay.
that takes place in Capamame. And so there's still a little bit of the cat and mouse thing as they're trying to like track down who's the bad guy here. Um, but that's something about it that I'm really excited about for people to read, and I hope people like.
Oh, awesome. Okay. I'm excited to see because like you said, they kind of have like this utopic vision, like we've escaped from the
Right.
iron fist from being in the trouble
Mhm.
for so long. Everyone's like, they're gonna want to come over, we're gonna live
Mhm.
life, we're gonna be happy, but like,
It's
are
never that
they?
simple. It's never that simple.
What's the point in a book two if everyone's happy and
Exactly.
life's good?
There's a lot of angst and unhappiness in book two, but there's also a lot of love, um, and a lot of queer love in book two. So
Which publishing always needs more of.
yes, I agree. I want all the queer love
Of course.
in all
And
of
and
publishing.
it's Pride Month now.
Exactly, right? What more could we hope for than to talk about queer love in science fiction?
Oh, Kai, that is a great question. I definitely wanted to touch on like the religious aspect of the story because like that is a huge factor that just that kind of like shapes life as they know it.
Yeah,
It's like the
yeah.
clerics and the beatitudes and
Hmm.
following those rules essentially
Yeah, yeah.
in the clerisy and the gods. Was the religious aspect drawn from a specific religion and your experience with it, or is it just like an amalgamation of religions and how it like impacts those institutions? Great question.
It's definitely, yeah, that's a great question. Thanks, Kai. It's definitely an amalgamation. I mean, I was raised evangelical, and I no longer consider myself an evangelical. In many ways, there are elements of Christianity in the book. There's definitely ways in which the clerics like almost evoke the Roman Catholic Church. So you can see that influence there. But I was also really influenced by histories of pantheons, so like Hinduism, Greek mythology, definitely Norse mythology influenced it there. And then even there's a god named Kata who is described as having Kata's many, like many, and they're essentially like spirit mini gods, like demigods, which is influenced by a lot of Yoruban mythology. And so religion was a huge part of my upbringing and strongly influenced the person that I am. So again, it was kind of natural for me to put that into the book, but it's a different world. So I decided I wanted to have a pantheon, and it's just influenced by tons of stuff and research that I've done. And like, who among us wasn't obsessed with Greek mythology when we were 7? Like it's unavoidable, right? So
We all it was that's like a canon event when you're seven,
yeah.
8 years old.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's like instrumental to almost every like person.
I did not grow up religious or anything, but I do find it so interesting when like sci-fi or fantasy like neglects to I'm going to use the word neglect because I often feel like it's intentional. When they don't include like a religious aspect
Yeah.
of their
Yeah.
book, and I'm not saying that like a book needs to center around a religion to be
Yeah.
considered good or successful, but like I think negating religion and not including it at all is kind of baffling to me because like our own world, whether you're religious or not, like religion often
It's
influences
there.
a lot of things that you
Right.
do.
Exactly. I mean, so a lot of that goes back to a long-standing belief that science is separate from God, right?
Right.
And so a lot of science fiction has imagined itself as, you know, disconnected from religion, and almost with this idea that, well, if science fiction is set in the future, then surely in the future we won't be weighed down by these ridiculous religious ideas, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I'm just kind of like, that's ridiculous. It's completely absurd to think that there will ever come a time where human beings won't seek meaning from something spiritual or beyond our own understanding, whatever that looks like, whether that looks like the belief in a single God, whether that looks like a belief in the spirits of our ancestors, whether it means some kind of like belief in nature deities or what have you. It's just impossible to me that would be the case. And so what's been really cool is that we are definitely seeing an increase of science fiction that it also explores religious elements. Anne Leckie's books are an example where they're not overtly religious or talking about a religious system, but there are mentions of like religious icons and things like that.
Yeah.
And so there's been a big increase of science fiction that explores religion, and that's just where my head's at. Like,
yeah,
that's what I want to read, and that's what I want to write.
Right. And because regardless of the way you look at it, no, a big part of speculative fiction is like figuring out like there's like a human aspect and like keep talking about humanity. And there's no way like or trying to like understand humanity. Maybe that's what I'm trying to say. And it's like we're always looking for meaning in something, even the things that we can't explain or understand. And whether like you go through it through like a religious lens or not, like we're always trying, or a spiritual lens. Because I try to think, I feel like I think about it more like that too. Because I didn't grow up religious, nor am I religious now. But I'm also trying to be like, how can I make meaning of the inexplainable?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think even people who are, virulently atheist, sometimes atheists more than anyone are aware of, like you said before, of how religion influences our world. And so there's really nobody, even if they don't believe in any kind of God, who can escape God's influence on the world. Right. So I wanted to create a world where that was also happening.
And also I have a question from Jay. Can you talk a little bit more about your process for making your fictional worlds like Givenny and Capamane? And you did spell those right, I'm pretty sure, Jay, because you said you listened to the audiobook. Right.
Well, Capamane is Capamame. So you got an M instead of an N, but I don't think it matters. So, the thing about creating a world that doesn't have the same linguistic history as ours is that it really wouldn't make sense for people to be named Jake. In this world, it makes sense to come up with unique words. Oftentimes, that literally, for me, comes down to what I think sounds right. So I explore sounds. But then what I also think about is how I think about sociolinguistics, and I think about how society impacts linguistics. So, for example, if we had a moon called Jeve that had this single, limited resource that's a stone, Jevite makes sense as the name of the stone. And then if we have a population of people who hundreds of years ago are literally moved to that moon exclusively to mine Jevite, well, it makes sense that they would have a name that is in some way related to that. So that's where we get Givenny. And those names are all derivative of the goddess Sejeven, right? So I was thinking a lot about how different factors of a society would influence language. And this is also true. A lot of like the place names have similar, they have similar formations or grammatic elements. A lot of, so like, for example, the different planets all have specific naming conventions. So people who are from Makess have compound noun last names: night, foot, moon, back, iron, way. And then people from Cater all have the same is it suffix to their name? They all surnames on Cater end with YE. So that's how we get Cognier. Lise Cognier is from Cater. And then the people on Taros all have triple names. So things like that, where I was trying to imagine how a society's linguistic heritage would influence names. And that's how I came up with that stuff.
I love that. I
Yeah.
mean, that makes a lot of sense, like when you think about it now after the fact.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a lot of it. I'm pleased that you came up with that question, Jay, because a lot of that is stuff that most people don't really think about. And it actually takes up a lot of work to come up with those things and to try. And then there's like the problem that, in the real world, you'll know 6 people named Sarah. But in a fictional world, it's like nobody can have the same name. And that, even though that's not actually what the real world is like, there's a reason for that, which is that you don't want your readers to be confused and think, wait, which Sarah are we talking about? You want your characters to have completely different names so that your readers know who you're talking about. But part of the labor of that is you can't just name 6 of your characters Sarah. You have to come up with a new name for each of them, and that's a lot of work.
And yeah, and I mean, I'm just finding one name that works has got to be hard enough.
Yeah, I mean, some of them come to me like immediately. Some of them go through, like Masar, his name went through like 4 iterations before I landed on Masar. Essek Nightfoot was almost immediate. It was like, yep.
It just rolls
I
right off
thought
the
of that
tongue.
and I was like, yep, that's her. She's Essek Nightfoot. That's perfect. So yeah.
Okay, I've got some, well, we have a little bit of time left. I've got some fun questions. This is about being a reader.
Okay.
Okay. This is what is your most anticipated release for the rest of 2024? What are you looking forward to reading?
Well, there's a couple books that I've read that I'm really excited about coming out. Lady Eve's Last Con by Rebecca Freymow, and then Red Sight by Meredith Mooring are coming out this year, and I just think they're fantastic. What are books that I'm really looking forward to coming out this year? Tasha Suri's The Completion of Her Trilogy. Oh God, I'm forgetting the name of it.
Oh,
It's
the it's a
it's
spice, not the spice. What did I
well,
almost
because the
hold on.
second one is
Oleander
Oleander Sword,
sword.
and then
Oh,
I
what
can't.
is
The
it?
Burning Kingdoms.
Yeah.
Is it the Burning Kingdoms? Okay.
That is the
Or the
Lotus Empire.
okay. All right.
That's the
Yeah,
last
the Lotus
that's the
Empire.
third
Okay.
book.
Yes. So I'm excited about that one.
Me too, because
Yeah.
book 2 ended on such an insane
Yeah.
cliffhanger.
Yeah, I know. So I'm really excited about that one. I don't know that it's coming out this year, but the final Locked Tomb book, Electo the Ninth. I'm really excited to read that. Um, uh, K.M. Enright's book, Mistress of Lies, is coming out this year, and it just looks like a just filthy, exciting, like, dark book. I think it looks so good. I'm excited to read that. So yeah, like part of what's weird about publishing is that I'll know about a lot of books that are coming out, but I don't remember, are they coming out in 2024 or are they coming out in 2025? But those
You're
are
just
some of
like, I'm
the
trying to finish writing my own book.
well, and this is the thing too that's really interesting is that when you've been published, lots of publishers will reach out to you and ask you to read upcoming books and give like basically like a blurb
Yeah,
saying, I loved this book. And so I'm constantly getting publishers asking me to do that, which is like great. But then I've got like my TBR, and then
right.
I'm constantly getting these other books that people, so there's just always so much going on in the
It's
finding time to read.
as a reviewer, so I get the opportunity to read arcs as
Yeah,
well. It
yeah,
is so hard to
I
find a
know,
balance.
I know.
And
It's
sometimes I feel like I have homework.
I know exactly what you mean. And you know, if I get an arc that I'm not like loving, then
Hmm.
I won't read it. I've gotten much better at DNFing books that I don't like, but there's so many books.
Ooh, Kai asks, do you have a date for the cover reveal for book two?
You'll know when I know. I don't know. Yeah. Um uh they're working on the cover now, but this is one of the things when I was writing my sequel, I was when I was when the first book hadn't come out yet, I was like desperate to see the cover art and had so much
Hmm.
anxiety over that. This time around, I'm kind of like, it'll get here when it gets here, and it'll be good, and I'm not going to worry about that. But I would think probably between 3 and 6 months before publication.
It's got to be soon because October's like tomorrow
And
in publishing.
October is what, 6 months from now, or is it 4? It's what? It's 4. My wife is yelling at me from the other room.
Uh,
October is 4 months away. Okay, so what I just said is complete nonsense.
yeah. So, and in publishing,
Hopefully,
like that's the next season. That's like tomorrow.
yeah, that's true. So I would hope that sometime in the next 2 months it will be released,
Do
but
you
I
know
don't.
what color it's gonna be? Because I feel like Orbit trilogies, they always go like red, blue, purple, or like
So
red,
it's
blue,
actually
green.
it's gonna be kind of reversed. It's gonna be I so the second book has a purple tone, and I think the third book is going to have a blue tone, but I don't know
Okay,
for
I can get down with that.
Jay, you asked who I would blurb if I could blurb anyone. I mean, I would love. I've gotten an opportunity to blurb some fantastic writers. I would love to blurb something by Anne Leckie. I would love to blurb something by Arcady Martine. Um, Megan E. O'Keefe is a fantastic space opera um, writer. I would absolutely blurb her work. I mean, you know, if the story sounds interesting, I'm excited to blurb anything if I have time to read it. So yeah.
I love that. Okay, I got another question. One last question. If you could visit any fictional world or universe, and you have to be a part of the plot in some way, where would you go?
Oh my God, that question is so hard.
Mm-hmm.
A
I
great
love asking
question.
it.
It's a great question. If I could go to any world and be a part of the plot,
You don't have to
um,
be a main character. You can just be like someone who works at the local tavern if you wanted
right,
to.
yeah, right. Well, there's a book I recently read called Ammonite by Nicola Griffith, and it takes place on a planet where basically there's a disease that attacks any human colonist and it kills all men. And so, so that's not why I'm interested in it. Why I'm
Okay.
interested in it is because women become parthenogenic. So there's generations and generations of women who then they've created society, and they can basically compel each other through dreamscapes to get pregnant. Again, none of this isn't because I want to be made pregnant, but the world is amazing. I love the world. Um, I would I would love to live in the world of not the books, but of the Prime shows Wheel of Time. I love that
Ooh.
world, even though there are terrifying things happening. What, babe? Oh, the worlds of Becky Chambers.
I
Oh my
haven't read
God.
Becky Chambers yet
Oh my God.
either.
She's
I
so
would
great.
I
She's
want to
so
go there.
great. And there's actually like, they are worlds where there's like real hope for the future. So those are some of the things that come to mind.
My answer for that question, usually, I'm giving you my answer against your will. I
No,
always tell people that
give
I
it to
want to
me.
live in the world of like legends and lattes. And
Oh
I want
yeah,
to work
that's a
at
great
Viv's
one.
coffee shop because it's nice, it's cozy,
Mhm.
and there's a low chance that I'm gonna die. Like I'll get to live
Oh
my,
yeah.
I get to meet my life expectancy there.
That's true. And I mean that's that's part of why I'm drawn to the Ammonite world because people just live like good, meaningful lives. And that's part of why the Becky Chambers worlds would be good because you can just live like good, meaningful lives. Um, so
I
yeah,
love it.
I love that. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for
Thank
taking
you
time out of your day to
guys.
hang out with us today. I hope you had fun. I had
I
fun.
definitely had fun. This is like my favorite thing to do is to talk to readers. I really appreciate the invitation and all of you guys showing up. It was fantastic. So
Yes, I
I hope
can't wait for book two. I'm sure everyone else feels the same.
I hope you guys like it. Don't hesitate to reach out and let me know your thoughts. And wish me luck for book three.
Where can everyone find you online?
So I'm on Twitter. I am just Bethany G Jacobs. G is in good. On Instagram, I'm Dr. Bethany Jacobs. And on Blue Sky, where I never go, I'm just like Bethany Jacobs. I'm just my name. You'll find me.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you again. I hope you have a
Thank you
wonderful rest of
guys.
your day.
You too. Hope to talk to you all soon and have a
Yes.
great weekend.
Awesome.
Bye.
Bye. Oh.